I'm going to start going over some basic CQC stuff. Some of you guys may already know this, and that's totally fine. Pretty much just going to go over everything starting from the very fundamentals and just kind of building our way up. That way, hopefully we cover all the bases. When you're working totally solo, obviously you're not going to be able to influence much map control because you're just one person. It's very difficult for you to, restrict the movement of suspects. With that in mind, you have to be a lot more conscious of your surroundings and stuff. Now, if you have wedges, you're in luck because in a situation like this, like over here, hypothetical, we have a bunch of unknown space and area where suspects can roam freely. By utilizing this door, I can close it and wedge it off behind myself. And while I have locked myself in this corridor, pill house, whatever, I know no one's going to come behind me. And that is honestly really critical because it reduces the amount of area that you have to keep scanning, which is already going to be hard pressed whenever you're alone. Especially when you're working alone, you want to keep things simple. You never want to overcomplicate your tactics because the more complicated something gets, the more variables there are for things to go wrong. One of the best ways you can also do this is by limiting the angles in which you expose yourself to at a time. Now, I've noticed when some people, because this here is called pine, if you don't know that, and I have noticed a lot of people do pie in this server, but a lot of the times they pie incorrectly. And what I mean by that is they kind of just throw themselves out while holding on this corner. But the problem is they're moving too fast for themselves. They can't accurately engage the threats and they're exposing themselves to more angles than they can cover at a time. Take it nice and slow. You want to slowly work these angles, or at least at a pace in which you can comfortably engage a target. Because the last thing you want to do is jump out too far and have two people shooting at you when you can only react to one. Additionally, when stacking on doors, you have to keep in mind how the door opens. If you stack on the handle side and this door opens, or rather you open the door, you're not standing in a line of fire. This door offers a form of concealment. When you stand on the hinge side, though, you expose yourself to a lot of angles at one time, which can be, very devastating. Additionally, another thing I've seen people do is they will kind of blindly walk into a room, or they will pie from the doorway, which is incorrect for two reasons. One, you're barrel stuffing yourself, which can make your character push their gun up. Additionally, not only are you restricting your own field of movement, but you're actually making it harder on yourself to acquire threats. You can actually stand quite a distance back from the door and pie around like that. And you can find this threat here and take it out rather than coming out here and having him find you first. Defenders will always have an advantage in a CQC situation, so you never want to feed into their advantage by walking into kill zones. The best way to prevent walking into a kill zone is, identifying them before you blunder into them. Speaking of doorways, another two things I notice, and this first one I can't harp on people too much for, but they'll get engaged in a threat and they'll start exchanging rounds with the subject. But the thing is, they never think about getting themselves to an advantageous position. They don't seek cover. They just keep trying to fight from the same position until either they or the target are dead. And generally, if I peek out and this guy starts shooting at me, I might return fire, but I'm going to I'm going to retreat back. I don't want to keep exchanging fire with someone. Now with a team, teams have entry orders. Now with entry orders, generally, someone's going to have a wand. You're going to have information on this room, and you're going to use utility, stingers, flashbangs, and whatnot to cover yourself. And what you're going to do is you're going to get into the room and take a dominating position. But we're going to build on team tactics later. But you never want to fight from the fatal funnel, and you definitely never ever want to fight in the fatal funnel. The reason it's called the fatal funnel is because while I'm standing here, I'm exposed to almost every single angle in this room. Meanwhile, I can only cover so many angles at one time. Another thing, I have noticed people don't really seem to know how to use their utility very well. I've seen a lot of people swing open doors and try to throw a grenade from this position, which is obviously just going to get them shot. You can utilize utility while also utilizing your cover, because I can still get the stinger into this room if I really need it to, by simply just bouncing it off the door here. So a lot of the times whenever a threat is in the room, try to think about how you can get a grenade into that room to take away their advantage. This is especially important in solo team tactics because you're alone. You're almost always going to be at a disadvantage in every room you encounter. So a lot of the times what I'll do is if I confirm that there's some kind of a suspect in a room, I'm going to deploy some kind of utility weapon solo, just because it puts the odds automatically in my favor instead of me being at a disadvantage. So flipping the scales like that really gives you a cutting edge that can help you win. Moving further down this hallway, in the previous example, we eliminated this threat, so he's out of play. Generally, while I'm advancing, I want to hug one of the walls. Now, whenever I get to this cover point, instead of pieing from the cover point, I'm actually going to back up here. And the reason I'm going to back up is it's a principle called crowding your cover. Whenever you crowd your cover, you can get barrel stuffs, and additionally, you increase your chance of getting hit by ricochets whenever something hits this wall. Whereas if you stand a few ways off, bullets that hit this post should ricochet off to the side away from you to where you won't have a chance of getting hit, or at least a significantly reduced chance of it. But from this position, I would continue the pie, and then I would hug this wall and I'd keep going. Now, what's nice about pieing like this is even before stacking on this door, I can actually see a threat in this next room and I can engage it. Continuing on, after engaging that threat, if I peek slow enough and I move slow enough, I can identify that there's another threat here. Once again, before exposing myself to any danger, I can see the target before it saw me, just because I'm moving slow enough. Whereas if you kind of rush things, you can end up getting flanked without even ever seeing your target. Now, I like this room too because pretty much with my earlier example of pieing, I already got to see a lot of what was in this room. So I can just pretty much continue pieing like that. And I can see that there's this blind corner all the way over there because I can't see into it. So because that's an unknown, I'm just going to assume that there's some kind of a bad guy there until I've seen that it's empty. So with that concept in mind, I'm going to keep trying to go and look for another threat. And pieing like this, I would have found one and I would have engaged it. Unfortunately, here I have another blind corner. So whenever I have two blind corners like this and I'm alone, I definitely want to utilize some kind of utility. In which case, I would try to skip it off the ground like so that way it hits the targets that I actually want hit. And then I can move in. Using your utility to cover your entrances is a huge, huge advantage, because while these guys are busy reeling from the utility grenade, you can move in, get a dominating position, and even neutralize the targets before they get a chance at retaliating against you. Now this door here is a bit of a tricky one. Now obviously my traditional example of always wanting to be on the handle side kind of falls apart here, because if I do that, I still end up really exposed and not really having good cover. I'm still exposed to a lot of angles, and even a subject that was standing here could still see my shoulder and take me out. So with that in mind, you have to change and deviate from the core principles. You have to adapt. And with that being the case, it's important that you understand the fundamentals of why we do the things instead of just blindly parroting them. You can't just be like, oh, it's always better to stack handle side, because that's not a universal truth. And that's something that will extend to all of CQC. We have general guidelines and rules, but you have to adapt to the situation. And the best way to adapt is by knowing the fundamentals. So keeping that in mind, I want cover, I want protection, I want to be minimally exposing myself to angles. And the best way to do that is to leverage this corner. So I'll pop a door.
Put your hands where I can see them.
And pull back while also being ready to engage a threat. And I'll tuck myself away so that way I can take the room at my own pace. And rooms like this As you can see, rooms can get very complicated. So you always need to make sure you're moving at a pace that's right for you. You got to keep in mind your own safety. Don't take on more than you can handle. If it's something that like you can't handle no matter how slow you take it, that's when you break out your utility. So if you don't trust yourself to deal with a room this complicated, there's no harm in throwing a grenade or, using some other tactical device to get any kind of an edge you can. You never want to underutilize your tools. You're not just deploying with a weapon. You have several tools at your disposal. Every single one of them. Information gathering is very useful. And on the opposite, bad information is worse than no information at all. Because hypothetically, if the mirror guy said that there is not a suspect left, even though we all know inside this skill house, there's a cardboard cutout here. If someone says that there's no one left, and we all just go in here, this guy could wipe out the entire team without anyone noting, because no one knew to look left. In fact, the opposite was called. They said left was clear.
Yeah, there's most likely two guys to the right, like there was last time. Just gonna... Oh! It's actually safe this time.
Well, you say that.
Oh my god!
You say that!
So, how do we get around that? You gotta follow the principle of trust but verify, which means trust the information your team gives you, but always, always, always verify it for yourself. I'm not saying to doubt your team. I'm just saying to make sure, because the information they gave you could be stale, meaning it's no longer true, or they could have simply been mistaken. We're human. We make errors. So always, 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 always trust your own instinct and gut first. Generally, taking this room can be simplified by holding back and keeping to our earlier principles of follow the wall and slowly pie at your own pace. You can see another threat in this room, you can engage it, and you're just really exposing yourself to minimal new threats at any given time. And if you take yourself slow enough, you can actually catch this guy hiding over here and move to engage him. You always want to take advantage of all of your vision. Don't tunnel in on what you're looking at here, because if you do, you can miss looming threats on the sidelines. Really have to have your head on a swivel, especially if you're alone, because you don't have a second set of eyes. No one can, watch your back for you. You have to be hyper aware of everything around you, which is why moving slow is so important, because it's impossible for you to accurately take in all this information so quickly. No matter how good you are, you will never be good enough to move very quickly while taking in all of that information accurately and safely by yourself. It just won't happen. So, you got to take your time, move at your own pace. This is a room that sticks to the principles. You can stay on the handle side, manipulate the door, check it for traps, you know it's good. You can swing it and you're not exposed to any threats. Conversely, where Wolfie was standing here, as you can see, he was exposed to almost the entire room. This is also a good illustration of what's called a corner-fed room. One thing that's unique about corner-fed rooms is you want the team to stack away from the side where they're going to be exposed. So you want them all over here. So in this particular instance, you don't want the team stacked 2 and 2, just because half the team is going to be exposed to heavy resistance while the other team won't be able to do anything until we actually get into the room. Whereas if the entire team stacks up on this side, we have a lot of safety, concealment, and protection. By standing over here, same principle applied. But in the heart of keeping it simple, stay to the handle side. Pretty much unless you have a mirror and you can actually analyze the room, and even then that's going to be a lead's call. If you pie slowly, you can safely engage the threat and check everything out. There is an area here that someone could hide behind. Now, my favorite way to check behind doors like this is after I made sure my surroundings are clear, I'll just close it behind myself. Not only does it add an extra level of concealment from anyone who might have somehow gotten behind me, even though we know that's impossible because of our earlier wedge. If anyone was hiding back here trying to pull a sneaky bastard move, well, we would have just discovered their plot and have killed them. So obviously here we have a door, and we have an unknown space on our left. Now this is a tricky situation because there's always the looming threat of someone walking through this door and engaging you. But at the same time, you can't ignore the threat of a giant open space like this either. You have to choose like the lesser of two evils. Like, you can sit here and you can rely on hypotheticals of someone coming through this door, and you can stand there all day waiting for it. But at some point, you have to take action. You have to take the initiative. The best thing you can do is just be aware and try to listen for the slightest sound of this door, so that way you can react in time. Additionally, moving slowly will hopefully let you catch the sound of that door opening before you meet the threat that's actually over here. But after this threat is dealt with, we have another room where we will again be stacking handle side. Obviously, again, when you open the door here, you will see that this is another corner fed room. And, well, we already touched on that, but generally you want to keep to the principles here and just slowly pie it. And this room's kind of tricky because you can actually see the hostage before you can see the hostage taker. But either way, point is you can identify a threat before the threat can identify you. And that is the core principle of why we work the angles the way we do. And why slow and steady kind of wins the race whenever you're alone. Generally, CQC teaches speed, violence of action, etc., etc. But a lot of that is revolved around team tactics. Without a team, you have to change things up because a solo person can't meet genuine armed resistance by themselves. Not without taking like elements of surprise and utilizing unconventional warfare tactics, mainly stealth, subterfuge, misdirecting the enemy, confusing the enemy, shock and awe tactics, etc., etc. All of these are fancy words which pretty much boil down to hide where you are, what you're doing, and surprise the hell out of the enemy. Best way we can do that is with our grenades and by keeping our noise footprint low. Suspects in this game will react to our noises such as our shouts and our gunfire. Some of the suspects that are patrolling may come to investigate where you're at, so you have to keep that in mind. Whenever you get finished dealing with a threat, expect his friends to come running. At the moment, they cannot detect flashlights, however, they will be adding that later in the future at some point. They haven't really said when, but at the moment, they cannot detect flashlights. So suppressors do actually work. However, they work similar to real life in that they only reduce your noise footprint by about half. A suppressor doesn't make a gun quiet, it just makes it not sound like a gunshot. Generally, you can't execute on a room without making a ton of noise. Even if you had a suppressor, you're still going to make a lot of noise because you're still going to have to shout, you're still going to have to like throw grenades and whatnot. But you have to be ready to deal with the attention that that's going to bring. More on the deployment of utility. I touched on ways that you can deploy your utility while doing it safely, mostly utilizing doors to bounce your grenades, but also, assuming this door was closed, you can throw them over things, which generally doesn't have as good an effect because it's just not as accurate. But generally, in close, tight areas, I like to use a stinger. And in nice large areas, I usually like to do something that will draw their attention, like kicking a door and then throwing a grenade, a flash grenade, like right here at the door, because that's going to make almost all of them look over at the door and look directly at the flashbang, where even if they're a pretty good distance away, they'll get flashed. That said, if you just throw a flashbang into a room and do nothing for them to actually like look at it, don't expect it to work. But generally, what you never want to do is put yourself in an open line of fire to deploy some kind of utility, not when you have other options available. Generally, I will almost always try to throw something off of a door, just because it's the safest way to get some kind of utility into the room, or I'll skip it off the ground, like so. Now, when and when not to use utility. The best times to use utility, whether you're solo or not, is when you're about to enter an overly complicated room, meaning one that has way more angles than your team can handle. Or B, you're entering a room where you know it's hot. Like, you know that there are suspects, you know that they're armed, especially if they're like entrenched, holding some kind of a position with their gun ready. You have to deploy some kind of utility. You're not going to win a one-on-one gunfight with them. If you do, you did it by sheer luck. You never want to just use utility haphazardly. You only get so much of it. So don't use it on rooms when you haven't seen a subject, especially if the room isn't very complex. Like if I was in this room and I was about to enter this room, I would absolutely throw one just because of hostage situation. You want to disable the threat. So that way you can safely rescue the hostage. That's a good use of utility. Point is you want to articulate reasons on why you're using it. Don't just use it because you have it. Honestly, even in a situation like this, you don't know that there's a subject here. You can suspect it, sure, but you don't know. And there's a door here. Here, using some kind of utility to cover an advance into this area would actually be a mistake, because you're actually inviting the noise disturbance to bring reinforcements from this door, which is the thing that you're obviously scared of happening here. While at the same time, sure, you would have affected the suspect here, but, you know, there was a chance that there was never a suspect here, and you just wasted a grenade and then invited enemy reinforcements to come tap you in the back. And, you know, that's just an all-around tactical mistake. So, whenever you're going to use some kind of a utility, have a plan, have a reason, think it through. Think about the consequences of the actions. That's pretty much the end of what I have. Does anyone else have any other questions?